All right, good morning, church. Go to John chapter 8 with me this morning. Welcome to Faith at Sellersville. We're continuing our series as we head up to Christmas called I Am. The question of who this baby was that was born 2,000 years ago has been a question that people have been trying to answer for 2,000 years. There's no argument that this baby that was born has made a significant impact on the world. In fact, last week I opened up the series by saying I don't think any other human has ever had the impact upon the world that this Jewish carpenter from Nazareth has had. There are millions that claim to follow him, people who claim to worship him. We just spent a significant time out of our morning this morning worshiping this man. So who was he? And in answering who he was, you find a fundamental shift in how you will live your life. See, ultimately what you do with Jesus will ultimately determine, by and large, a large direction of your life. So when I was doing youth ministry for over 12 years here at Faith, the one question I always pressed teenagers to wrestle with was, who is Jesus? Not even primarily, how should you live your life, although that's not unimportant. Because you can live a great life, and if you get Jesus wrong, then the great life you lived will have not accounted or meant for anything in eternity. See, there's always the day that we'll meet God, the day that we'll all pass into eternity. And so what you do with Jesus matters on that day. But what you do with Jesus also matters now, and how you live your life now. And the decisions you make, the choices you make, what you choose to do with your time, how you choose to parent, how you choose to approach marriage, a lot of that is fundamentally involved with what you do with Jesus. So as we approach Christmas time and we see nativities and manger scenes and hear the Christmas carols about Christ, I mean, you can even turn on secular music stations and you hear what? You hear the traditional Christmas carols. You know, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, the First Noel, these stories in song that talk about Jesus. So last week we talked about Jesus' statement that he gave after he had fed 5,000 people in a miraculous way, and he says, I am the true bread of life. That what Jesus came to offer men and women was not physical or material blessing. That Jesus isn't a genie in a bottle that we rub and say, Jesus, I need this. If you want me to follow you, Jesus, then you have to do these things for me. That Jesus didn't come to provide material blessings. Jesus came to provide something much more important, and that is spiritual redemption, forgiveness of sin, restoration with the Father, removal of guilt, removal of shame, forgiveness. And if you go with me to John chapter 8 today, in verse 12, it says, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, so these are the words of Jesus. This is who Jesus claimed he was. A lot of people will say that Jesus was a lot of things. He was a great teacher, an incredible Jewish rabbi, a great leader. Perhaps he was a lunatic or just some crazy man who thought he was God. But the reality is, who does Jesus say that he was in his own words? And so Jesus makes a pretty bold claim here in John chapter 8, and he says, I am the light of the world. It's a pretty bold claim. Notice that he does not say, I am a light. The definite article there, Jesus is important because Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Which is important because when we live in a culture of pluralism, which basically says there are many ways to God, we have to look specifically at what Jesus said. If Jesus, again, this isn't my opinion, this isn't our opinion here, this is, if Jesus' words are true, what he's saying, he said, I am the light, not a light, I am the light of the world. So how many of you have ever tried to find your way in the dark? Okay, what kind of an experience is that like? So every fall here, Paul Perrault plans this men and boys camp out, which is great. Love camping. My boys love camping. I'm okay with it. up to a certain point. So we got up to the campground this year, and by the time we got up there, it was dark and wet and cold. So when you mix dark, wet, and cold, I'm out. Okay, I'm just done. I'm like, let's go home. All right. But, we made a commitment to the camp house. So we get up, and it's dark, it's wet, and it's cold. And I was wearing shorts, T-shirts, and flip-flops, which is my attire of choice most of the time, because it was warm in the day down here, and then it was cold and wet up in the mountains. And so I am trying to unload all of my gear and sleeping bag in shorts, T-shirt, and flip-flops, and it is dark. And as I am making my way to the tent that had already been set up for me, it was like in the back farthest corner of the campground. I'm going, and I slipped on this mud because I didn't see it because it was dark, and I hit my toe, I'm wearing flip-flops, on a rock, all right? And I did not say a bad word, but I wanted to, okay? All right, I'm just being real with you guys, okay? All right, trying to find my way through the dark was a difficult process, okay? In my house, I have a late 18th century row home, and about 2/3 of all of my outlets and light bulbs are on one breaker. I don't know why. So if you plug in one too many things, this breaker always trips. Well, the light in my basement is also connected to this breaker. So almost on a weekly basis, I am trying to go through my basement, and I'm just going to be for real with you. Sometimes my basement isn't the most organized part of my house. Okay? There's a lot of, so I am fumbling through my basement, tripping over things, running into stuff, stepping on things, trying to find the breaker box. And then once I make it to the breaker box, I know which breaker it is. It's the one on the right-hand side at the top. So I got to feel my way to the breaker, get it, and turn it on, then the lights come on. Trying to manage life when it's dark is very difficult. Walking in the darkness is not an easy thing. And yet this is the exact picture that Jesus portrays for those of us who are trying to make it in life without Him. To not follow Jesus in this text is equal to walking in darkness in a spiritual sense. So to not follow Jesus means that we walk in darkness. And let me tell you something, that this is a world and a culture that's walking in darkness. All right, people trying to find their way, people trying to figure it out. Okay, and I say this all of the time. Okay, you don't have to look around the world very much before you have to admit that something's gone terribly wrong in our world, right? There's a lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness. Okay, it is, as the scriptures say, it is darkness because of sin and guilt and shame. We hurt one another and we are hurt by others. This is a world and a culture, and I think even in the church, where we're trying to find the right way to live, we're trying to find truth, and the world is going and searching for truth in all kinds of different ways. If I can find truth here, so what they'll tell you is, well, the key to a better world, the key to truth is education. So let's just focus on education. No, it's not this. It's human reason. All right, so if we can be intellectually at the point where we can reason our way through stuff, that's where the light is. That's where truth is. No. It's in social reform. It's in social justice. So what we do is we're trying to find light and trying to shed light and trying to reach truth by any way that we can. But what it ultimately looks like is me trying to walk in the dark woods with flip-flops on. I slip and I fall and I stumble and I get hurt. Is it a dark world that we live in? Let me tell you this. Let me just give you some statistics about the United States. It's estimated that over 15 million people in the United States abuse prescription drugs. I'm not even talking about heroin or cocaine or other drugs. I'm talking about just prescription drugs. It's estimated that 15 million Americans abuse prescription drugs every year. Well, what's that all about? We're medicating ourselves to death because we're hurting. And that's not just physical pain, that's emotional pain, that's spiritual pain. We're medicating ourselves to death as a country because we're looking for hope somewhere. And when we don't find hope, we've got to escape the pain of life. Then if you go to drugs, and this was just between 2007 and 2011, it's probably up even more substantially, I know, in the past probably 3 years. But did you know the use of heroin? Heroin use rose by 75% from 2007 to 2011. And I don't even have a statistic about how much it rose from 2011 to 2016. But I can guarantee it's a huge jump even from 2011. If you look at the heroin epidemic that is even in our school districts in this area, it's devastating. And young people are looking for hope. They're looking for light. They're looking for something to give them meaning. And they're trying to find it in heroin, while their parents are finding it in prescription drugs. We can go on. Because the U.S. makes up 5% of the world's population. Did you know that we consume 75% of prescription drugs globally? Now, that's not all bad, abuse of prescription drugs, but it tells you kind of where we're at as a culture. If you go further, 1 in 5 girls in this country, 1 in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 in 5 girls will be the victim of sexual abuse in their lifetime. That's this country. The statistics are almost the same for males. It's estimated that we abort nearly 1 million babies a year. The abortions that are reported to the CDC are around 600,000 to 700,000. Those that aren't reported are even more. Would you agree with me that there's darkness that we live in? And people are looking for hope. People are looking for light, and people are looking for truth. Statistics say also that upwards of 85 to 90% of young people who grew up in the church, by the time they graduate college, will have walked away from their faith. Let me say that again. 80 to 90% of young people who grew up in the church profess to follow Christ. They will walk away from their faith by their senior year of college. Now, what's going on there? What's happening in the church today? Because now we're getting to the point where, we can talk about culture at large, but then we can also, say, what's going on in the church today with our children? That so many who have grown up in the church, having been taught the Bible, are now, when they get into secular society and secular universities, the very message and the claims of Christ are being undermined. You don't really believe that Jesus was God, do you? I mean, how ridiculous is that? You don't really believe that when Jesus claimed that he was, as we're going to talk about today, the light of the world. I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing. After all, he was just a man. How could he be the light of the world? You don't mean to tell me that there's only one way to salvation, only one way to forgiveness. After all, there are many religions in the world. There are many ways to God. You can't tell me that there's only one. And so what happens is, what secular culture does is it begins to chip away at the foundation of this question: who was this child in the manger? Who was he? And what happens is our young people leave our churches and they are questioned, and they don't have the foundation that can handle the onslaught of criticism and questioning of who Jesus was. And so higher criticism and liberal theology comes to the table and says, there were a lot of good things that Jesus said and did, but he most certainly was not God sent from heaven to pay for the sins of the world. And this isn't anything new. This has been happening for 2,000 years. So if you walk with me through John chapter 8, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Now Ryan's going to be my clicker here this morning because I don't have one. So Ryan, you can put up the first couple slides there. Hit it twice. One more time. There you go. What Jesus says is this, and he breaks it down. Notice his statement. I am the light of the world. Okay, great. What does that mean for you? Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So where is truth found? What does it mean to not walk in darkness? It means that you walk in truth. You know what is right, and you know, therefore, what is wrong. And if you know what is right, then you will walk in what is right, you will believe what is right, you will dedicate your life to what is right, and then when you die, you will be forever with the Lord. And so Jesus boldly says, I'm the light of the world. If you follow me, you will walk in light. The opposite of that is what? To not follow Christ. Again, these are the words of Jesus. So if you unpack and exegete simply what Jesus is saying, to not follow Jesus means therefore to what? To walk in darkness. To walk in darkness. So he says, if you follow him, you will have the light of what? Of life. What is the light of life? It is eternal life. That, yes, impacts the way that you live now, but also guarantees you eternity with God forever. So to follow Jesus is to submit to him. To come to the point where you recognize, I understand that Jesus is the Son of God. He came, he lived, and he died for me. I will submit to him. I will follow him. I will embrace him for who he is. As the light of the world, the only one who can deal with my guilt of sin, the only one who can remove it. So this is the words of Jesus. I am the light of the world. If you will follow me, here's the promise. Here's the promise to the world. You will not walk in darkness anymore. You won't walk in darkness. There won't be a need to self-medicate yourself because you don't know how to deal with the pain of life. There won't any longer be a need for you to pursue anything else. Why? Because everything that you need in life for living and for dying is found in Jesus. And so what we do is we proclaim Christ. And so he's the light of the world. And if we live in darkness, what we do is we take the light into the darkness. And we can say, hey, how's your search for truth going? My guess is if it has nothing to do with Jesus, it's left you hurt and broken and looking for hope. And we as a church are sitting here saying, we have hope. We have light. It's in Christ. We're walking in the light. And this is the thing, church. Even though we claim to know Christ and to follow him, how often do we slip into the darkness and begin to struggle with the way that we used to live before we met Jesus and before he radically changed our lives? See, that's always going to be the tension, right? That's always going to be the struggle until we meet Jesus. This tendency to drift back into the darkness because we still have that battle with sin and our past at times. But we know that salvation is found in Christ. And if salvation is in Christ, we will have the light of life. So Jesus makes this statement, and he gives these promises. So I'm the light of the world. This is what this means for you. Is that good news? I would say yes. This is why we call it the gospel. This is good news. Like, do you want truth? Do you want life? Do you want to know how to have a reconciled relationship with God? Well, yes. Do you want to know that when you die, you'll forever be in the presence of God in heaven? Yes. Okay, that's good news. That's why we tell it to people. This is good news. And so he says this, and he offers this good news. And then verse 13 comes along, and notice what it says. The Pharisee said to him, "You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true." And so our next point, Ryan, you can hit it, is that our culture, as Jesus' culture did, will constantly attempt to discredit the claims of Jesus because they refuse to submit to him. So Jesus comes on the scene in the first century. He's in the region of Galilee, of northern Israel, and he is preaching and proclaiming to be the light of the world, and he was a threat to the established religious order of that day, the Pharisees, who were very committed to keeping the Old Testament law as a means of salvation. But what the Pharisees did is they went beyond the Old Testament, and they said, well, yeah, keep the 10 Commandments, but here's 600 other laws that we want you to keep too. So they put burdens on men that the Bible didn't put on men. And so they began to, in a real legalistic way, use the law to force people to do what they wanted to do. And Jesus comes along and Jesus says, no, it's by grace. You just come to me and I'll forgive you because I kept the law for you. And so they hated Jesus. I mean, he was a threat to them. And by the way, Jesus was starting to amass a following of people that were starting to believe what he was saying. They were starting to believe in his name. He is the promised one of the Old Testament scriptures. And so this was not going well with the religious leaders, the Pharisees. And so they basically began to challenge Jesus, as our culture does today. It's no different. And they said, basically, you're only bearing witness to yourself, and your testimony is not true. And basically what they're saying is this: listen, just because you say you're the light of the world doesn't make you the light of the world. Now, is that true? I mean, I can stand up here and I can claim to be a lot of things. All right? That doesn't make me what I claim to be. And so just because Jesus claims that he was the Son of God, just because Jesus claims that he was the light of the world, that doesn't make you the light of the world. And they said, you are only bearing witness to yourself. What you say is not true. Well, Jesus has an answer to that. Verse 14, Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true. For I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I came from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. So Jesus' response is that his testimony, and you can advance these next two, Ryan, his testimony is true, whether you believe it or not. Now, there's a lot of pressure, I get it, in our culture. Because what the Apostle Paul said about the gospel is this, that it's foolishness to the Greeks, to the Gentile world. You mean to tell me, okay, let me get this right. You mean to tell me that the Almighty God of the universe is one God but three persons, and he sent the second person of the Trinity, the Son, to be born of a virgin, in the city of Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, and that he grew up and lived a sinless life and died, and he rose from the dead, and now he forgives all of your sins and reconciles your relationship to God, and you get to go to heaven when you die. And one day he's coming back, and he's going to take you with him. Just want to, that's what you believe? It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what we believe. Oh, okay, that's cool if you want to believe those crazy legends of the Bible, those crazy stories that have no historical value. So what happens is the testimony of the Christian faith gets chipped away and undermined at every turn by our culture. This is what the Pharisees were doing with Christ. Seriously, you're claiming to be the Son of God. You're claiming to be the light of the world. And Jesus initially starts out by saying this: my testimony is true. It doesn't matter whether the world believes it or not. The fact that people don't believe in Jesus and want to discredit his claims does not make it untrue. So his first point is that even though you say that me only bearing witness is not valid proof of who I was, I am still who I am because, why? Because I know where I came from. Jesus is saying, I know where I came from. Where did he come from? Right, heaven, right? He was sent by the Father. He says, I know this. Obviously you don't, and you don't understand that, and you don't get it, and this is the point Jesus is making. But just because we live in a culture that doesn't understand Jesus, or doesn't get Jesus, or doesn't believe in the claims of Jesus, that does not make it untrue. But what happens so many times is the pressure of culture forces Christians to cave under that pressure. And well, maybe it's not true, or maybe because I want to be accepted by culture and I want to be accepted, then maybe theologically I need to give a little bit or give a lot when it comes to the claims of Jesus. And maybe he was a good guy, but maybe he wasn't the actual Son of God, and maybe he didn't do all of those miracles, and maybe he didn't even rise from the dead. And so what happens is there's a tendency, in order to be accepted by culture, to cave underneath the criticisms of the culture. When Jesus himself said, this is not anything that's going to be very popular, most people will look at this as foolishness. But to those, Paul says, who are being saved, it's the power of God. And so for a lost culture living in darkness, I don't expect them to understand why we lift our hands and worship Jesus the way we do. That's strange to them. I don't expect a lost culture walking in darkness to understand why we dedicate so much of our lives to worshiping this Jewish carpenter from Nazareth. But if Jesus did come from the Father, as he claimed, then he is the light of the world, and he is worthy of our worship and our devotion. And every bit of what we're doing here this morning, he's worthy of. He goes on in verse 16 and says, yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For it is not I alone who judge. Notice what he's going to say. This is a radical statement. But I and the Father who sent me. And so, Ryan, you can advance our next slide. Because the testimony of Jesus, how do we know it's true? Jesus claimed to be these things. How do you know? Have you ever struggled with this question? How do I really know that what I believe is true? How do I know that there is only one way to heaven and not many ways? How do I know that at the end of the day, if I live my life devoted to this, that I'm not going to get to the other side of death and find out that it wasn't true? You ever have those doubts? You ever wrestle with those? I know young people probably wrestle with those, and as a youth pastor for so many years, I noticed that. It's like, how do I really know, Doug? How can we be sure that what we know is true, or what we claim to believe is true, because so many people don't? And so Jesus says, I'm not the only one claiming and bearing testimony to who I am. There is another, and it is God the Father. The Father of the heavens and the earth, the ones, Pharisees, that you claim to worship and believe in. He bears witness to who I am. Now, according to the Pharisees, what Jesus just said would have been blasphemy. What Jesus just said, that the Father bears witness to who I am, would have been blasphemy. How can a man claim to be the light of the world sent by the Father? That's blasphemy. Which is ultimately why he was crucified and hung on a cross. Verse 17, in your law it is written that the testimony of two people is true. So according to the Old Testament, in order for something to be substantiated as true, you needed to have not just one witness. It couldn't just be one person saying, hey, this happened. No, it had to be on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so Jesus says, I am the one who bears witness about myself, so witness number 1. And the Father who sent me bears witness about me. Witness number 2. So listen, church, if what Jesus is saying is not true, then Jesus is a blasphemer. And if Jesus is a blasphemer, how can you follow any of his teachings? But this is the game we want to play. Well, Jesus said some good things, and he was a good guy. Not if he was a blasphemer. He is either who he said he was, or he was a blasphemer. Or the third option, as C.S. Lewis says, he was just crazy. Oh, I'm the Son of God, believe me. Woohoo, cuckoo. Okay, one of 3. He was either Lord, or a lying blasphemer, or a lunatic. Just crazy. Which is it? Jesus says, I am Lord. And I am claiming that, yes. But the God of the universe, the Father in heaven, also bears witness to who I am. Why? Notice what he says. The Father who what? The Father in verse 16 who sent me. So Jesus is making another bold claim. Who sent him from heaven to earth? Who sent him? The Father. It's in theology the Son's submission to the Father within the Holy Trinity. So as Trinitarians, we believe in one God, 3 persons, one Godhead, but Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all right, that live in equal relational love and devotion to one another, but as one God. Like, Doug, I don't understand that. I don't really either, but it's clearly what the Bible teaches. And so when Jesus says, the Father sent me, Jesus placed himself into submission to the Father, as it was the Father's will, as we studied last week, that none of the ones that he had given to Christ, that Christ would lose, but that the Father would raise him up on the last day. That was last week. And so the Father sends Jesus. Jesus submits to the Father's will. He descends to us. He clothes himself in human flesh. This is what Christmas is all about. He clothes himself in flesh. This is what we call the incarnation. He is sent by the Father. And so Jesus makes this claim that God the Father was sent or sent him to earth. Now, here's the thing. How do we know, and what substantiates this claim that Jesus was sent by the Father? What was unique about the birth of Jesus? It was a virgin birth. It was a virgin birth. A miraculous birth that could have only taken place if it was God doing it. This is why we teach and stand on the doctrine of the virgin birth? Because it substantiates the claims of Jesus, that Jesus was sent by the Father. This was no normal birth. This is why Christmas is so important to us. This is why the doctrine of the incarnation and the teachings around the birth of Jesus are so important to the foundation of the church. If Jesus was not virgin born, then he can't claim that he was sent by the Father. But because the Father does this miraculous thing, it substantiates the claim that Jesus was indeed the bread of life and the light of the world, the Son of God, come in the flesh. So he is sent by the Father. And that claim is substantiated by his virgin birth, which is why that doctrine is so precious to our church. And you can hit the next two, Ryan. We'll hit those. I just hit the first one. But the next one is this. Because I want you to jump down with me. How does the Father bear witness to the Son? It's seen in the virgin birth as him being sent by the Father. But it's also seen in the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. So where we're going with this is this. How do you know that your faith in Christ is based upon truth? Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. Were his claims, because any man can claim to be the Son of God, any man can claim, but did Jesus prove it? Jesus was sent by God. Was it proven? And again, don't get me wrong, my emphasis is not here to say that everything that we believe has to be based on proof and evidence. Why? Well, then that's not faith. Faith means what? I believe because God has given me the faith to believe. Yet, the point that I'm making is we can build a foundation for our Christian faith because these things weren't just claims of a crazy man. These weren't just claims of a blasphemer. These were truth claims of the God of the universe himself. And we can be confident that he was who he said he was because he proved it. And how did he prove it? In verse 21, he says to them again, I am going away, and you will seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I'm going, you cannot come. Now, we're going to get back to these statements here, but for context, I want to read them. So the Jews said, will he kill himself, since he says, where I'm going, you cannot come? And he said to them, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. Again, some more claims that are pretty radical. Verse 24, I told you that you would die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. Okay, that's pretty narrow, isn't it? Unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sin. Again, we're going to get back to that. So they said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, just what I have been telling you from the beginning. Like, how many times do I have to say it? I've been telling you. I've been clear with who I am. I have much to say about you and much to judge, but he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world that I have heard from him. Again, it's either blasphemy or it's truth. But they did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father. Now notice verse 28. It's a really important verse in all of this interaction. So Jesus said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. So Jesus makes these claims, and they question them, and they undermine them. They tell him he's a liar. They tell him he's a blasphemer. They're talking about putting him to death. But then Jesus makes this statement and says, when you lift me up. What's that a reference to? It's a reference to the cross. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, Jesus says, even so what? The Son of Man must be what? Lifted up. So this concept of being lifted up is a reference to the cross. So he's foreshadowing that. So when you have lifted me up, what will happen? It is then that you know, or will know, that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. So how do we know that Jesus was exactly who he said he was? How do we know that? And that the Father fully bore witness to the testimony of Jesus. Because when he was lifted up on a cross, and we read the events of what happened on that night, how darkness came over, and the earth shook, and the wrath of God came down not on you and me, not on the world, but on his Son Jesus. That Jesus died. And how do we know that the Father was satisfied with the sacrifice Jesus made? Listen, a lot of men had died on a lot of crosses before Jesus, right? A lot of men had been brutally beaten and bloodied and hung on Roman crosses. Hundreds and hundreds of men before Jesus had hung on crosses. What made Jesus so different? What made that death so significant? Because Jesus was different. Because Jesus was significant. Because Jesus was who he said he was. And how do we know that? Because 3 days later, the Father did what? Raised him from the dead. And because of the resurrection of Jesus, and I believe with all of my heart that this is what Jesus is alluding to, when you have lifted me up, and 3 days later, ultimately, when I am risen, you will know that I am he who you have spoken of. So at the end of the day, everything we believe about Jesus rests and falls on what? His resurrection. Did he rise from the dead or not? Which is why the tradition of the first century and second century and up to today, the 21st century church is what? Is to meet on Sundays. Not that you have to, but that's the tradition. Why? Because that was the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And the Apostle Paul says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then our faith is in vain. If Jesus didn't rise, I'm going to go find a new job. Okay? I'm going to tell all of you to go. But the fact that the Father was fully satisfied with the sacrifice of the Son, it was proven when Jesus rose. And God says, I'm satisfied. And we know that Christ rose from the dead. And I'm not going to get into all the arguments. In our small group discussions, we can talk about how do we know that Christ rose from the dead and what are the apologetic arguments that substantiate the claims of the resurrection of Jesus. They're actually really fascinating. If you've never done that, take some time and look through the arguments about how do you know about the resurrection? What happened in the historical accounts of first century Jerusalem when Jesus from Nazareth was crucified and buried and then there was an empty tomb? Like, how do we know? I mean, what happened to the body? And a body was never produced, right? They could never find the body. Why? Because he rose. And then you have the first century apostles, every single one of them, to their dying breath, being tortured and beaten and crucified and boiled and oiled. The history of the church is so full of the history of these apostles who knew and saw the resurrected Jesus dying for that claim that Jesus rose from the dead. But then if we go back, and Ryan, you can hit the last few slides here. A rejection of Jesus, the great I am, the self-sustaining, all-sufficient, all-powerful Son of God. A rejection of Jesus. And I say this in love, because I am shining light in the darkness. When we proclaim this to the world, to lost friends, family, neighbors, whoever, this Christmas season, as we engage in conversations, we have to be clear that a rejection of Jesus means that we die in our sin, not because we made this up, but because Jesus clearly says in verse 21, I am going away, and you will seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. Verse 24, I told you that you would die in your sins unless you what? Believe that I am He. You cannot be in the presence of God if you are still in your sin. God as a holy, spotless, sinless, perfect God, in all of his love and mercy, is also a God who is just. And justice demands what? Judgment. Our entire legal system is based on what? Justice. This is why we have police officers and judges and courts. Why? Because when we break the law, we want people to pay the price. We want justice. God is no different. God demands justice. God demands perfect obedience. And when we have violated the law of God and we have done wrong and sinned, what happens? We deserve justice, judgment, right? But what happened 2,000 years ago is Jesus hung on a cross and bore the judgment for us, so that if we will believe in him, we will no longer walk in our sin, but will walk in the light. So if you'll follow Jesus, I'm in. I believe. Faith is in him. You will walk in the light. And so what we're asking you to consider this morning, and this is twofold, because I know there are people in here, for the most part, I'm preaching to people who have said, Doug, I'm in. I know. I've made that decision years ago. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I've been walking in the light for these past however many years. For those of you, let me just say this. Take time once again to gaze upon Christ, your all-sufficient payment for sin. It is so easy to get so focused on everything that's going on in life. Family conflict, health problems, financial issues, problems at work, marriages that are broken, children that are struggling with whatever, that it is so easy to get our eyes on those things and to become frustrated, discouraged, and to be consumed with the darkness that is around us. And so what I want to do every single Sunday, to be honest with you, is help you take time to once again gaze upon Jesus. To gaze upon the beauty and the glory of Christ. Because what he's done for you is he's taken you and he's given you light. And he's given you truth. And he's pulled you out of the darkness. And he sets you on a path that's lit by him. We don't have to wander in the darkness anymore. We don't have to live like those who are in darkness. We can celebrate the fact that Christ has pulled us out of that. That's what we celebrate when we gather on Sundays. And that's what I want to do, because we're in the culture and we're in the world all week. And if we can, on the weekend service, just help you gaze once again upon the beauty and the glory of Christ, that you can then take that light back out into the culture, back out into your homes, back out into your workplaces, back into this world. Our world is hurting. They're looking for hope and they're looking for light. And we have it, and it's in Christ. So we're going to keep preaching this real heavily over the next few weeks. Really every Sunday, but specifically as we head toward Christmas. And those two services we're offering, Christmas Eve and then Christmas morning. And we're going to say, hey, invite people out to church, because what we find is that people who are unchurched around Christmas time will come to church. For whatever reason, the tradition of the Christmas season and then the Christmas songs or whatever, they're more open to coming to church, and we want to provide that opportunity, and we want to shine the light into their world. So who do you know that's walking in darkness? Do you love them enough to take the light to them? And if you're here with us today and you're like, I'm not sure where I'm at, if you will follow Christ and believe in him, his promise is for you. You will walk in light. He will radically love you. He will radically forgive you. He will radically remove your guilt and your shame You don't know my past, Doug. I don't. But your past is not greater than the grace of Christ. Your past and your brokenness is not bigger or greater than the grace of Christ. It's bigger than that. His love and His mercy will take you and radically change you and set you on a new path.